So welcome to In the Know. My name's Victoria Kettis and I'm a mom. And I also work with Family Smart as a manager and facilitator of Family Smart practice.
And I am Karen Peters, and I'm a therapist with the Thrive Life mental health team. And I've worked with the Ministry for Children and Family Development for about 20 years, so I have that experience as well behind me. And I'm a mom as well of two daughters who are now 9 and almost 13.
And beautiful.
New phase, yeah.
Yes, teenage.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time to be here. I want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We know that relationships are really important, so we commit to building and deepening our connections with the First Peoples on whose land we live, work, and love. So the questions that we're asking and having a conversation today are all based on questions that families have shared with our PIRs about things they want to know about anxiety. And I really love that that's what's guiding our conversation together today. So thanks for having it with me and answering the questions that are so important to people. So we know anxiety shows up in all different ways. It's that physical stuff where we have upset stomachs and headaches. It's the avoidance and the clinginess that our kids can express. But it also can show up as we're learning as anger. And as a mom, this is a really close to my heart topic because that was how my son's anxiety showed up. But the challenging part, the confusing part for me as a mom is I didn't know it was anxiety. I just saw the anger and didn't really know. So what's the connection between anxiety and anger?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think we as adults are really good at detecting when it's anxiety because our kids run from something. So it's the hiding mechanism, right? The getting away, the fleeing. That seems more obvious and intuitive to us, but anger feels at us, like it's an attack kind of mode. And I don't think that comes as clearly associated with anxiety. So we kind of have to relearn that. So I always go back to the root of what I would describe anxiety as, because one of the fundamental things I always had wrong growing up was I thought anxiety was an emotion. It's not an emotion. It's a set of sensations that happen when we are trying to protect ourselves. And it's an automatic response from our nervous system to keep us safe. And it doesn't have to be real danger in the moment. It can be what we think is danger. So anything that's perceived. So when we get in that mode, what we're used to seeing in our kids is the clinging or the running away or the avoidance, or, we get to the front of the school and suddenly our pants are being gripped too, or I don't want to go, I don't feel good. We're less used to seeing things like rage or doubling down, right? Or irritability, and so to tie the two, really, I think the function of anger is almost the same as the clinging, right? It's trying to protect us from the thing we're perceiving is scary. So I would say that's the link, is that it's not actually that the presentation feels really different. How it comes at us feels very different than this kind of meek-natured, fearful looking response. But it's trying to do the same thing. It's trying to keep us safe. It's trying to help us not have to engage with the thing that we're terrified of.
So when I think about that in my son, all of his anxiety when he was very young showed up so loudly as anger. And I know that all the people in his life, it showed up as anger as well. And he was never shown or told or expressed by any one of those caring adults that it could be anxiety. So when I think about that, knowing that all those caring people in his life, as well as myself knowing all I knew, because I spent a lot of time trying to find answers to his anger and trying to understand it, learning more skills. So when I think about that, as parents, how do we know when it's anxiety and not something else?
Yeah. I always ask out of a place of curiosity for patterns. I'm always looking for, when does the anger show up? An anger response can happen pretty quick in the moment. And maybe we don't get it because the thing that's happening right before the anger doesn't seem fearful to us. But if we start asking like, okay, I'm noticing that the anger pops up every time we're about to transition somewhere, right? Like getting from A to B, and it doesn't matter where A to B is. It might be in the house to out of the house. It might be screens to no screens. It might be about to go from a quiet space with one person into a party, which to us, we think, it's a kid's party. How fantastic is that, right? And so it doesn't add up to us. But if we can sit back and kind of monitor and say, it's interesting that anger shows up at the same time as these other things tend to happen, right? Then I think it's more easily paired with an anxious experience where it's functioning as something. There's a purpose to that anger. If it's something else, which it could be a number of things. So I have one daughter who's more leaning toward the anxious side of things. Her anger comes out like in those situations where I know what she's now anxious about, and I know when she's going to double down, stick her heels in and fight me on it, right? But for my other daughter, it is less predictable because for her, it's about ADHD. And for my younger daughter, her rage or her anger erupts for very specific reasons, but it isn't because she's worried about it. It's because she doesn't know how to regulate her own system to move from one place to another. So, but in the end, I think, at least for me as a parent, I just wanted to know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So I could say, okay, it's tied to anxiety, but really the only thing that's helping me with is to know in the end what to do with it. Am I treating it any differently if it's about anxiety than if it's about ADHD? Am I treating anger any differently in the moment? And am I teaching them different skills in between the storms? So yeah, the label's only helpful if it helps us, if our understanding helps us do something to help.
Well, I know it would have helped tremendously with my son because I spent all the time focusing on what I was doing wrong, on what I needed to learn to make things better, to treat situations differently so it wouldn't erupt in anger. And I remember all those times I spent asking him, what's making you so angry? And of course he couldn't ever tell me. So it just exacerbated the anger because now he was even more frustrated because now I'm trying to get him to talk about it, trying to figure it out, and it's just making him more angry. And I recall so clearly those times where it would just escalate it that much more when we tried to talk about it. He's an adult now, and that's still a challenge for him whenever I try to have a conversation about something that he's uncomfortable about. His words now feel a little angrier, whereas his actions aren't, because he has skills to be able to deal with that. But I think about it, thinking of practical skills and erupting anger, what kind of things can parents be doing? One of the things you mentioned was not trying to understand it, but trying to know what to do. So what kind of things can we do in those erupting moment times?
As hard as this is, I think the most effective tool is having compassion. And that has two aspects to it. It's compassion for self as a parent and compassion for your child. Because it is so frustrating as a parent to pour into an angry situation thinking that it's going to help. And like you were given that great example, you think you're doing the right thing. You're trying to do the right thing, and you actually might be doing all the right things, but you're still getting the anger increased, right, back at you. And that feels really helpless. And when a parent's in that position, their own triggers happen, right? We feel shame and useless and helpless and backed in a corner. And so I think if we're gentler on ourselves and less urgent in the moment, and we take a deep breath and we say to ourselves, oh, this too shall pass, right? This is really hard. I get why I feel this way. It's understandable. Then we can offer that outflow to our kids, and we can sit in it with them instead of getting angry back. Because anger serves the same function for us as adults as it does for our kids. It protects us. So if it pokes at something in us and you start to feel angry and anxious and frustrated, it's only natural you're going to react with that, right? You're going to try and protect yourself from that. So if we can lower the shame in us and reassure ourselves that we are, of course, doing the best we can, and then pour that out on our kids and give some compassion there and validate the experience, I think is like ground level first step. Always don't skip that one, you know. I hear from a lot of parents who ask me, what do I do? Because they're scared that if they validate, that they're saying, it's good that you feel anxious about this. They don't want to reinforce it, right? And that's a lovely gut reaction of, I don't want this to be their life. I don't want this to grow. I don't want to be part of growing it, right? But in reality, the validation is not about the pairing of the anxiety to the situation. It's about saying, I see you, I hear you, whatever's going on inside your body feels super overwhelming. And that's fair.
Yeah.
You can't, I don't expect anything other than that right now. And that's a hard place to be. That's the voice of compassion coming in, right? Of saying, I'm going to do my best to get where you're coming from and what you're experiencing and how scary that must feel. And that gives you an opportunity to separate the kid from the problem. Because that's the other piece of it, is that it merges really quick. We see the kid as anxiety rather than it's a kid who has an anxious response, right? And then we get all activated because we're like, no, don't be that kid, right? And what we want to say is, you're a kid who has a lot of feeling, who has a lot of sensitive smoke alarms going off. And I'm going to be here to help support you to turn that alarm down because it's not needed right now, right?
What I love about that is we're attuning with our children. We're really getting to that relationship part rather than focusing on the anxiety. And I know how important that is. As my son, as a grown young man now, he thanks me all the time for how I dealt with him and his, once I knew it was anxiety, he thanks me for being able to be with him in that and really acknowledges that he knows it wasn't easy, but he was really grateful that I could do it so kindly. And so I think that kindly part as a parent, I think it's really important. I love the idea of the self-compassion that you talk about having for ourselves, because we don't always do the right thing. And as you say, when we do the right thing, it's still not always going to get what we need. It's not going to make the anger go away or the anxiety go away. So we really need to forgive ourselves when we've had those moments of not responding the way we would have liked to have, because we are living with our own anxiety in that moment. And I think I know for me, I didn't know I was dealing with anxiety of my own, because I know in my head it's contagious. I know that anxiety is one of those things. The contagion factor is huge. But I was so focused on my son's anxiety that I didn't ever take time to take care of my own. So now that he's got the skills and the ability to deal with his anxiety in a more safe, productive way, that now I not now because I'm now aware of it, but I spent a lot of years just realizing, oh my gosh, now I need to take care of my own anxiety. So it did require so much self-compassion and so much extra kindness to myself as I realized that things aren't, some of the stuff that was left over was mine and not his. So I had to take care of that in order to move forward and forgive myself for a lot of things that I did not in ways I would have. So thank you for that. So we talked about the anger part of it and how it feels unsafe for us and we defend ourselves. A lot of parents are wondering about when that anger turns into violence and aggression. And it's scary for them. It's scary. They don't know what's going to happen for siblings and for other people in their lives. What do you want families to know about when anger turns to aggression and violence?
It's so hard. It's so hard. So again, there's two branches to this, because there's the in the moment and there's we're talking about kids who we've learned predictably that this, maybe we don't know when it's coming, but we know it is coming, right? So this is not this like out of the blue rage episode. This is okay, we know about our child that when he or she feels really anxious, this is the doubling down response, right? I'm gonna fight to keep myself safe. In the moment, there's things we can do to help pass through the storm. And then there's what do we learn in between the storms? And both are important because there's a critical safety component, right? We really need to attend to that. We can't just walk away from unsafe situations. So in the moment, there's an opportunity, I think, to model for our kids. So again, I think about the basis of anxiety. It's not an emotion. It's the sympathetic nervous system ramping up, taking over, and hijacking our brains. So when those lovely parts of the front end of our brain that can think straight, can be logical, can problem solve, can use language, can get creative, can connect with people, it's out the window, right? So when it's out the window, we can't speak to that part. We can't use that tool in the toolkit. It's frozen, it's gone, it's not available. So then we have to think about, okay, where is our kid available? Our kid's available only basically through their eyes. They can watch what you're doing, but they can't hear instruction. They can't communicate what they're feeling or identify. And I think it's really important that we get that it's not a choice.
Yes.
It's happening at them and to them, and they feel frightened by that experience. And so rage and anger and violence, you can assume is dysregulation. And dysregulation, the easiest way I know how to explain that is you're detached from yourself. You do not feel at all a sense of control over your own body's experience. And because that's so terrifying, we use protective mechanisms again, right? So that's what the anger is functioning as. When it gets to the point where it's violent against themselves or against you or against a sibling, our aim is not to control the child. Our aim is to control the environment.
Thank you. It's really an important piece to
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, like really move things around. Like physically get up and take your attention off the child, right? And move around the room to move things out of the way. To speak reflectively, to validate while you're doing it. This is not about the child. This is about keeping everybody safe. And we're just going to do what we need to in this moment. And don't worry, we'll get there, reassurance. And then modeling for them when they're more in a safe environment, and they can still be really angry, that you really truly can attune and get their experience. But again, you can't say that, right? Because words won't get sucked in.
Yeah.
They won't hear it. So I think about a game-changing moment for me with my younger daughter, who was trying to jump out of a moving vehicle because she was so angry that she couldn't have 2-foot-long subs from Subway. And I was the only other one in the vehicle. I'm driving, it's dark, and we're on a narrow road with a ditch right beside it. And I'm thinking, if she kicks my seat any harder, I'm gonna end up in that ditch. So I put my hazards on, slowed down, took care of my own anxiety, did some deep breathing. And I could not regulate her. We could not get to a calmer place. So as soon as it felt just safe enough to drive, I brought her to the hospital. And we had the urgent assessment done. And that psychiatrist told me something that nobody else in all our research and all our contacts had told me, which was, when it gets to that place, you need to recognize that you can be doing all the right things and they're just not accessible to you. They just can't. And co-regulating is your best shot. Your best shot at it. And I went away going, that's great, but I don't know how to do it. Like, what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
And the strangest thing was that as a professional, I had signed up to go to a workshop the next morning. I was frazzled beyond belief. I had probably 2 hours of sleep that night. And I show up to the conference and there's, I'm late. So I have to weasel through all the tables feeling very, aware that my eyes are puffy from crying. And so I sit in the front row and I'm there with a mom hat on now. I was not there to learn as a professional. I was like, just give me all your skills, people. I need to figure that, because last night was horrible. And I moved from a place of internal helplessness to a place of, okay, I can actually see what co-regulation looks like. And Lisa Dion was the person who was speaking, and she does synergetic play therapy. And the whole basis of co-regulation was you have to feel what your kid is feeling. Don't detach, don't walk away, unless you're unsafe, then walk away. But try and glean their experience and show them with your body that you feel what they feel. It's reverberating. So when you talk about it's contagious, it sure is. Like, you feel it. And that doesn't make you broken, that makes you whole. It means you get it and your body's working. So use that. So for the first time I felt like, oh, I can do something with that. I shouldn't be shutting it down and avoiding it and containing it. I should be using it. So from there on, I started practicing. When my daughter would rage, I would walk into the room with her with one foot on the ground, breathing, and the other foot in her world. And I could say to her, okay, I'm noticing what that feels like. It feels scary. It feels overwhelming. I feel shaky. And I could say it and I could model it. I didn't look Zen. I wasn't like, okay, sweetie, we're just gonna let it pass. Because that was super invalidating to her. It would ramp up her anger because she's like, you don't get me. Like, whatever you're feeling, you don't understand. That made her feel unsafe. So the second I could say to her, okay, this feels really scary, she saw, because her eyes worked. She could see that, okay, you get it. And then she watched what I did with it while she was writhing on the floor and kicking and punching. I was less focused on her and controlling her and telling her what to do. And I was doing it myself. And it doesn't make a difference the first 10 times, but it makes a difference after you do it 100 times, because it starts to sink in and they start to model after you. They start to pick up.
Awesome.
So now when I say, whew, I'm feeling the energy coming, I'm feeling it. I'm not saying you're a problem. I'm saying, oh, I notice what's going on. How are you and I going to manage that? We catch it earlier. And then when it gets really angry, I can just go through the rhythm. I don't even say anything anymore. I just do the breathing. I get a glass of ice cold water. I crunch ice. I bounce around. I move the energy through me. And eventually she just copies me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that you speak to how you discovered that you don't have to be Zen. I mean,
do
what
not.
A responsibility as a parent to try and
right?
be
and
the
a recipe
calm
for failure
in the
'cause,
storm
man,
when you
doesn't
don't
work.
feel so calm.
Yeah.
So with that, I love there's some things we can do proactively. So
Yeah.
you've spoken to a few of those where we can. Our job is not to be Zen; it's to model for our kids how to work through and get to the other side of the storm.
Yeah.
So are there other things that we can do proactively as parents?
Yeah. So outside of the storm zone, right? This is when they're relatively calm for them. So even if there's some bubbling anxiety, but you've got an end to your kid that's different than when they're freaking out, right? When their whole brain is online and it's up and running, you have the whole toolkit to work with, right? Here's what I'm hearing from adults who come into the office and say to me, man, I remember this anxiety I feel now stems back to when I was 3. I remember going on road trips and I needed information and my parents did not give me information. I didn't know where we were going. They thought it was fun and adventurous and I was panicking in the back seat. And what I remember, the person would tell me, I remember the response of my parents was to get irritated with me that I felt that way. Just enjoy yourself already, kind of feel, right? And she says, now as an adult, I get why that was frustrating for them. But I needed something they weren't giving me. And if I just had that, I would have been able to relax and enjoy it. But I didn't feel capable of handling the uncomfortable feeling that was happening in my body, right? So that anxiety feels like heart racing, pupils dilated, watching for danger, trying to scope the environment for information you need, right? All that energy could have been spent differently if a parent had said to her, "You look worried. Do you have questions about where we're going?" Right? So it's not your problem. It's, I notice something that's off for you, and I'm going to sit here and help you calmly get what you need. And then we'll preload, we'll front load, right? And adults in the office tell me that they wish they had learned to feel capable. That's ultimately what it comes down to. It's not, I wish there was a magic wand, or, you know, or that my parents dealt with everything perfectly. It's that I wanted to have felt like they got it, and that I wasn't alone. So if parents can speak to that and say, in the calm, I know that that's hard for you and it comes up a lot. And if you want to understand it better, I can explain what happens inside your body. You know, it can give you, basically it's giving give you the data, right? I'm going to give you the data so that your brain can make sense of it and you don't feel crazy. So equipping your kids in the opportunity. So something I want to say about that is you need to do your own self-care as a parent, because I know for me, I was too exhausted to do that work. I was so busy going from fire to fire to fire to fire to fire that by the time there was no fire, I was like passed out on the couch, you know, open the bottle, because I was like, this is like, I need to recover. I need to recover from it. And I was so busy recovering and then getting ready for the next storm that I wasn't doing anything proactive in between. So when I learned that, yes, it's not just an adage, take care of yourself, put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on your kid. It really matters. Like, and self-care means grounding yourself and having a settled nervous system. It doesn't mean a day at the spa. Although if you have the capacity to go to the spa, please go ahead and take that opportunity. I never had that, but it's not anything fancy. It's carving out space to allow your system to feel settled. Because if you're always frazzled and prepping for the next storm, that hypervigilance takes a toll on your sense of capacity and capability. And then you're not there and available for your kids. So the in-between needs your self-care, and then it needs your investment. You want to teach your kids how to say what they feel, and how to feel it in their body. And I've done this exercise with families, and it's actually really fun because it's enlightening, but it's not so super intense. But families will sit around a table and I'll set a timer for 3 minutes, and I'll give them a piece of paper and a pen, and I'll say, your job is to come up with as many emotion words as possible. And the parents automatically go into this exercise thinking, well, this is going to be telling about what my kids write down. I want to know how little they know about their, you know, I'm expecting that. And then they realize, I don't have the language. Like, I came up with 12 words. Like,
hard to help
12
them
words.
model,
Right. And I think about, you know, in my generation growing up, I was not taught to say how I felt. I was also not taught to think about how I felt in my body. I was not taught those things, right? So how am I going to teach my kids if I don't know those things myself? So then it becomes a family exercise of like, okay, I got some learning to do myself, right?
Big time.
So I'm going to start paying attention to, do I always say happy, sad, mad, and glad? Or do I say, I feel excited, I feel nervous, I feel concerned, I feel overwhelmed, I feel trepidatious, I feel like the language, you could come up with hundreds of words, but usually we stick to the same dozen, you know? So we've got room to grow in that area. So making that a part of you can make that a part of a family tradition every night at the dinner table, wherever you gather. Make it a challenge. Can we beat yesterday's score? Can we come up with 10 more words that we didn't know yesterday? Should we look it up in the dictionary? Should we Google that? And then knowing where it sits in our body, map it out, you know, like Yeah, because where you feel nervous in your system probably isn't the same as where I feel nervous.
Yeah.
Right? If you get excited, you might feel it differently in your body.
I love that you're giving tools to be able to talk about the hard stuff, because we can't talk about it in the moment. We know that physiologically we're not able to have a conversation or reason while we're feeling anxious or angry. So I love that we're taking something that's not usually mentionable and talkable about. I love Mr. Rogers' quote, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And when I think of that, this is one more place that we get to be curious about it in a really safe when we're doing okay way, and what a great thing to be able to give ourselves, that we can then have more things to model for our kids. Because what I'm hearing is that that's the one thing we do have control over, is what we model. We don't have control over what we're doing in that anxious moment, and giving ourselves permission to be all that we're being, and then helping our kids, showing them all the different ways that we can manage those is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So in thinking of that, so we've looked at some things we can do. What about when we're seeing it in anger showing up and kids acting out in ways that feel really unsafe and angry? When do we know how can we tell the difference between when it's maybe a real illness to when it's our anxiety showing up? Because as a parent, I keep hearing from other questions that they've asked is that they feel like they would deal with these differently. Like if it's an illness, I would do this, and if it's anxiety, I would do this. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, illness is usually based on something healthy that has grown out of control. So it's outside of what helps us function, right? So sometimes I think it's too categorical. We think like illness versus health.
Yeah.
And I think that's a continuum. So if it serves us well, it's healthy. If it takes away from our functioning, it's toward the side of illness, right? That's what makes us feel unwell. And so it's a bit artificial to say if it's one or the other. But I do hear in the question maybe that there's something about like behavioral. You know, we use that term about, is it manipulative? I think really is. If we undo the layers, we're wondering,
are they manipulating?
Are they controlling us?
Oh, see, and that's where I got to remind us that every behavior is communication. So they're trying to tell us something. So manipulation.
It can be irritating in how they're trying to get it, right? Because we don't want to feel like we're being used or contorted to get what they need or get out of something. But really, if we can see past that, it's always serving some kind of function.
Yeah, definitely.
And if we always behavior it out of them, like we'll use reward, punishment, and all those old strategies that we've learned probably were used on us as kids. Again, this is where it becomes super important to separate the kid from the problem.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, she's very popular, so you may have heard of her, but Brené Brown is a US researcher who talks a lot about shame and resilience. She's a guru in this area. And something so key that she has said is that there's such a big difference between shame and guilt. Shame is when we say, I am bad. And guilt is when we say, I've done something that needs fixing. I've done something bad or something harmful. And that is outside of us. Sure, we participated, but it doesn't define who we are.
Yeah.
When anxiety becomes fused with who we are, we start to feel shame. Because it's become us, we are all entwined with it.
Yeah.
If we can separate it out and say, sure, there's behaviors that we use, we can change our behavior. We can change the way we think, but we cannot change our our automatic protective nervous system. What we can do though is change how we think and feel about it so that we're less panicky about the panic. Right? So when parents ask the question, like, is it behavioral or is it an illness? I always think, okay, well, if you're asking that, you're probably worried, am I being manipulated and they have control and they're pretending they don't have control?
Yeah.
And I think in any case, I would ask past the behavior, what's it getting them? And how can I help give them a different tool to get what they need? rather than waiting until it feels so unwell that it's controlling them. You know?
Thank you. When you said that, it brought tears to my eyes, because I'm thinking of my son, and he's now at that place where we can have conversations about this. Whenever I do one of these talks, I always make sure I check in with him and see what he's okay with me sharing, and he loves that other people get to learn from his hard. The one thing that always surprised me when we first started talking, when he was older and could express things, was how much shame he felt around how he did show up with anger. And I'm so grateful that we're now at a place where when we talk about it, it's from a place that we can heal and not have that shame. But it makes me sad to think that our kids can feel that shame about something they're doing that they have no control over. So for me, one of the key messages is definitely that kindness to ourselves as we discover that we're not always able to do what we wish we would. Be kind to ourselves through it, and to know that the things that are going on that are so uncomfortable for us are things that our kids don't have control over. I think of that quote, our kids aren't giving us a hard time, they're having a hard time.
Yeah, great quote.
And how important that is for us to remember in those really hard moments, and to be able to then take time to make sure we celebrate those easier moments and talk about this hard stuff during those times, so that we can model for them and get information from them and share and be able to let them know what's going on in their body. With my son, I remember he used to always cry when he was in high school, when he'd raise his hand or they'd call on him, because his nervous system was doing it all on its own. And when he finally got to understand, he's like, oh my gosh, thank you.
That's what that is. Yeah. Right? Can name it.
Yeah. So I think those are really important pieces. So as final thoughts, what do you want parents to know that maybe you haven't shared yet that you think are important to leave them with?
Oh man,
I know 100 things.
100 things. You articulated it really well. It's relationship, it's connection, it's compassion, it's forgiveness for our own missteps. Forgive yourselves, because oh man. So I love the quote you shared. The one that sticks with me, and I don't even remember what the percentage was, and it's kind of irrelevant, but the bulk of, like 80% of attachment is in the repair. It's in the post-storm. It's not the wash the storm away, prevent the storm from happening. It's the how do we reconnect after and not run away from it. And it teaches our kids and ourselves ultimately that crap can hit the fan and we're still okay together. That is the foundation and the reassurance that adults who struggle with an anxiety that's out of control for them cling to, because it's the foundation that they can say, I can still rest assured that people care, they get me, and I have a safe spot to land. And without that safe spot, that's where the true depth of I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I don't have people, I don't have understanding. That's where the real wound can sit. We can deal with treating anxiety. It's one of the most treatable things out there. It's the depth of the shame attached to how we've learned things about ourselves in the storms that don't get the repair that matter. So my encouragement is to come back to your child after the storm. Here's what's tempting though, right? The storm passes and we go, whew. And then we go back kind of like, let's not create another storm. Like we're scared of it.
Of course, yeah.
Of course. But you have an opportunity to reassure your child that was really tough, what we just went through. That was really hard. We're grounded now. I love you so much, right? Like the reconnection is what sticks. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, good, because I was terrified that I was ruining the attachment that we were pouring so much into. And I'm thinking, man, I react all in the bad ways when the anger hits, right? Like all the things I swore I would never do as a parent, I was like, I was in the mess and doing all the wrong things, wrong in my head, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, too late, damage done. And it's not. It's not. So 80%. Cling to the 80% and just don't lose your opportunity when you're calm again to go connect with your kid and process. Talk about how that was. Oh, what do you think we learned from that? Like, what was that like? What can we do next time differently to either keep you more safe, to keep us more safe, to feel more capable. Really, we just want our kids to feel like they weren't undone by it, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What a hopeful message to leave families with. Cheers to the 80%.
Cheers to the 80%.
Oh, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Karen, for such an incredible conversation. And I hope families that you see yourself in this conversation, because these questions came from you. And yes, you're not alone. Be kind. And 80% is a pretty wonderful thing to know that we can go and repair and have those processes that help us get and stay close to our kids.
Yeah.
So as we close, I just want to thank our funders. Family Smart has been receiving funding from the project from the Provincial Health Services Authority, as well as the Ministry of Children and Family Development, in partnership with Here to Help. So thank you for being with us. Take care of yourselves and be kind in those hard moments. And know that we're all doing our best. Take care.